All right, welcome back to the Fighter Pilot Professor. I am your host, Meta, and today we're going to be talking airplanes. As you can see, I'm wearing my airplane shirt, so got to be talking airplanes if you're wearing an airplane shirt. And we'll be talking about the Ukraine acquisition of F-16s, and we'll also be talking a little bit about how to build a winning organization, or maybe another way to put that is an organization with a winning mentality. As always, you can follow me on YouTube, Instagram at the Fighter Pilot Professor, and you can get these podcasts wherever you get your podcasts. Welcome to the Fighter Pilot Professor podcast. I'm your host, Meta, and in the Fighter Pilot Professor podcast, every week we examine world events and your daily life through the mind of a fighter pilot. The episodes answer your questions, harnessing my experience in 25 years of flying fighter jets and my PhD in history, policy, and strategy. You can tune in wherever you find your favorite podcast. You can follow me on Instagram and on YouTube, the Fighter Pilot Professor. Okay, so over the summer, the Ukrainian Air Force took delivery of F-16s. And these F-16s were originally delivered from the Netherlands, and then recently it was announced that a second round from Denmark will be delivered. So each of these deliveries, around 18 or so F-16s, which amounts to, in American translations, that amounts to about one squadron's worth of F-16s. So in total, the Ukrainians are expecting to receive approximately 2 squadrons, or maybe a little more, of older Dutch and F-16s and Danish F-16s as well. And so I thought it would be interesting to sort of discuss the differences between the F-16 and the previous aircraft Ukrainians were flying, which was the MiG-29. And in my opinion, while the acquisition of these F-16s is a win from the perspective of NATO and other Western allies supporting the Ukrainians, I'm not totally sure that it's going to make a huge difference on the battlefield. And there's a couple of reasons why I think that way. And they mostly have to do, well, the first reason I think is it mostly has to do with the sort of design of the airplane themselves. And the second thing, and this I think is more important actually, has to do with the doctrine in which you employ these aircraft. So the first thing we'll talk about here is the design of the F-16 versus the design of the MiG-29. And what I mean by that is what the aircraft were designed to do, and then sort of how they operate or how they work, sort of from a pilot interface perspective primarily. And both of these aircraft are reasonably similar, although the MiG-29 are reasonably similar in vintage, I should say. The MiG-29 was designed in the Soviet Union in the 1970s, and it's really a Soviet aircraft at heart. And if you are an airplane follower, you know what I'm talking about. If you're not an airplane follower, basically the Soviets build airplanes function over form. So they build them rugged, reasonably simple. They are made to do a lot of different missions, and they're not very pretty to look at for the most part. On the other hand, F-16 is really, quite frankly, a nicely designed fighter. It has nice lines. It's very sleek looking. Although they were designed in similar eras, the F-16 is one of the first fighter aircraft to have a fully fly-by-wire system, and this is important. Additionally, the F-16 requires a little more care and feeding from a maintenance perspective, and all of these things are going to kind of play into how I think this will play out for the Ukrainians using these aircraft. Now, the second part of the aircraft is the cockpit and heads-up display and sort of the pilot interface part of it, right? So we talked about the design, and that's going to play in like how the airplane flies and that kind of stuff. But an experienced pilot's going to be able to pretty quickly figure out how to fly an aircraft. Really, the problem, in my opinion, comes in employing the aircraft, and this is really where it gets interesting, I think. So you look at the cockpit. Here's a picture of the MiG-29 cockpit, and this picture here is a picture of the MiG-29 heads-up display. And as you can see, this is it's a very manual airplane. There's a lot of switches On the dash, there's a lot of what we call steam gauges in pilot speak. In other words, these are older mechanical display gauges. There's not a lot of automation. There's not a lot of digital display, and a lot of the employment of the weapons requires the pilot to actually take their hand off of the stick or throttles and activate a switch. On the other hand, here's a picture of the F-16 cockpit and the F-16 heads-up display. And, what is not intuitively obvious if you're not an aviation person is that a lot of the controls, especially weapons employment controls and radar controls and those types of things for the F-16 are on the stick and throttles. And that means that the pilot can operate most of the weapon systems without ever having to remove their hands from the stick and throttles. And this is a huge benefit in combat, obviously, right? Because you don't have to look away from what you're doing. You don't have to reach off of the control surface or the control stick or the throttle in order to activate a weapon system. And so that little bit of difference makes a huge difference when you're employing this airplane in combat. Frankly, however, that HOTAS, as we call it, hands on stick and throttles, is pretty complex on the F-16 and requires a very precise knowledge of how the airplane works. And the F-16 being a multi-role fighter means that it has different modes, quote, that you can put the airplane in. So you can have it in navigation mode, you can have it in air-to-air mode, and you can have it in air-to-ground mode as an example. And these different modes then do different things with the hands-on stick and throttle switches. So the various switches and buttons on the stick and the throttles do different things depending on what mode the airplane is in. And so what all that translates to is when the pilot is employing this aircraft in combat, they have to be cognizant of what mode the aircraft is in order to understand how to best employ the weapons or be able to operate the different sensors like the radar, targeting pod, and other types of sensors that the aircraft has on it. Additionally, the heads-up display, and we showed the differences there, are wildly different, right? Where information is displayed, the amount of information that gets displayed, and how that information is presented to the pilot are totally different. The MiG-29s largely operate in the Cyrillic Russian alphabet. F-16s obviously primarily operate in English, and so the font even matches those differences in the alphabetic characters that are used to make up the displays. Additionally, simple things like altitude, airspeed, heading, etc. are displayed in totally different ways and in totally different scales and in totally different places on both of the heads-up displays. So all of this adds up to, in my opinion, learning to employ the airplane in a combat situation is going to be pretty challenging for these pilots. And this is not to disparage the skill of the Ukrainian pilots. I know lots of people that have flown with and against the Ukrainian pilots in training, and they, sort of universally say that they're very talented pilots. So I'm not disparaging them in any way, but I'm just simply saying that while an experienced pilot can learn to fly an airplane pretty quickly, learning to employ it in combat is a totally different story. And all of these subtle differences, in my opinion, are going to make it super challenging for the new Ukrainian F-16 pilots to employ them successfully on the battlefield. Additionally, they're getting a pretty abbreviated training course before they go to combat in these aircraft, and so that's going to make it even more challenging. And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, as it relates to employing the aircraft in combat, the battlefield that the Russians and the Ukrainians are engaged on is super complex. There's a lot of surface-to-air missiles that are very advanced on both sides of the lines. There's a lot of electronic warfare. There's all kinds of drones, artillery, etc. So it is a very complicated battlefield to be engaged on. Arguably, it's the most complicated battlefield that we've seen in a very long time from a combat perspective, right? And so in all of these ways, it's going to make it very challenging, in my opinion, for even the most skilled Ukrainian pilots to quickly and proficiently adapt to using the F-16 on the battlefield. Additionally, or sort of most importantly, in my opinion, is doctrine. And this sounds super nerdy, I know, and most people don't know what doctrine is, but doctrine is basically how does a military organization understand the way that it operates, right? So there's basic doctrine that explains how certain missions, infantry missions, Air Force missions, etc., operate. And one of the main key differences between, say, U.S. doctrine and former Soviet, now Russian doctrine revolves a lot around how aircraft and ground forces get employed jointly. Additionally, it also revolves a lot around how aircraft and other weapon systems employ in a counter air or a counter surface to air missile situation. And U.S. doctrine and Soviet, now Russian doctrine that the Ukrainians would likely be operating on are totally different, right? And the U.S. takes a totally different mentality towards offensive versus defensive air operations, suppressing and destroying enemy air defense systems, including other aircraft and surface-to-air missiles and anti-aircraft artillery and all of these things. Additionally, we have different doctrinal understandings of how to do close air support, how to do interdiction, and a whole myriad of missions. And so, in my opinion, while the F-16 is a very capable aircraft and the Ukrainian pilots are likely very capable, they're facing a difficult battlefield to learn how to employ these weapons on. But also, they're going to have to sort of adapt their doctrine and their operational style, if you will, to how the F-16 gets best employed. And frankly, because it's a U.S. aircraft, it's designed to do some certain things. And so therefore, it best integrates with ground forces, other air forces, etc., in a very particular way. And in my opinion, that's going to be the most difficult thing for the Ukrainians to overcome, and therefore it will make it that will be the thing that makes it most challenging for them to successfully employ them or for them to make a difference on the battlefield. Those are all my opinions. I hope that you guys keep sending me comments or thoughts on what you want to hear about next. As always, you can follow me on Instagram and YouTube at the Fighter Pilot Professor. All right, so diving right in here to what does it mean to have a winning organization, or what does it mean really to have a organization with a winning mentality, right? And we all can probably pretty quickly, put together like what some famous winning organizations, the Yankees, for example, right? The most World Series championships come to mind, right? The New England Patriots when Bill Belichick and Tom Brady were there. List goes on and on of these great sports teams, for example, that were notoriously good at winning, right? And arguably that same mentality can easily spread through other types of organizations. And I think there's a few critical ingredients, if you will, to building a winning organization, or maybe more importantly, a winning mindset within your organization, right? And even though some organizations may not always be as successful as, say, the Yankees or whatever, right? They still have winning mindsets, right? And this sets them apart from other organizations. And this also sets them apart from most importantly, from organizations that don't have a winning mentality, right? And this is different than, in my opinion, it's different than saying I want to win, or I want to be the best, or we want to dominate our sector in this business category, or whatever. This is a totally different thing, right? Most people want to be successful. That's kind of a no-brainer. This is not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is like deeply embedding the ideas of success into your organization. And so, and like I said, in my opinion, there's a couple of key ingredients that have to happen. First of all, there has to be a common vision or mission that everybody in the organization gets behind, right? And that has to be a little deeper than just win, baby, as Al Davis once said, right? You have to sort of focus in your organization on what it is that you want to do and what you want to do very specifically. I know that we've talked here in the past, and I'm sure a lot of people know the ideas of how to set goals and objectives, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-based, setting SMART goals, as we like to say. And this sort of same thing applies to organizations, right? We have to have these very specific objectives that we want to achieve. And they have to be understandable. The vision of success has to be understandable for everybody within the organization. And in my opinion, it has to also be a realistic vision or objective, and it has to be applicable to sort of everybody in the organization. Not to call out Google per se, but Google had an organizational motto that was like "Don't do evil" or something like that, right? And so that's kind of a weird vision of in my opinion, of how an organization is to be successful. Because it's not particularly applicable to everything that Google does. But that was their thing. So as a leader in an organization, I think it's imperative upon the leadership to set forth like what they see as the vision of the organization. And you can't, in my opinion, also as a leader, you can't just like lay it down on the organization. You have to have some inputs from the folks in the organization as to like what it is that we're trying to do. What do we value as a group? What do we value as a place? What do we see as our niche in the world, right? And so the second thing I think has to happen is that leadership has to lead the way, hence leadership, right? Leaders of the organization have to lead the way. And this is not just the top level leaders, but also the mid-level leaders as well, right? They have to understand what's going on within the organization in order to sort of guide their lower level teams towards the success of achieving this objective, right? And the reason why I think especially mid-level leaders are really important is because they have to understand sort of up the hill, as it were, to like the strategic level of the organization and the direction that the organization is traveling, and then down the hill, as it were, into like what the average person in the organization is up to. And they have to be able to connect those two things together. So if you lead a team, big or small within your organization, then you have to be able to translate what it is that the big boss is saying to you down to the people that work for you and with you, and make the thing that they do translatable to how that helps the company achieve its objective, right? And this ties back to why I think it's important for companies to have strong, connected visions to help each other out, right? The next thing I think that has to happen is the people within the organization have to work sort of on two complementary planes. Leadership has to be trustworthy, and the average worker, as it were, the average team member has to be bought into the system, right? So for leaders to be trustworthy, they have to do the things that they say they're going to do in a credible way, or at least make credible attempts to do those things, right? Obviously, if you say you're going to do something and you never deliver on it, that takes away your credibility. However, if you are at least making credible strides to achieve those things, that goes a long way into helping an organization achieve, right? Similarly, those below, or the average person on the team, has to buy into the system. They have to believe that this team is going to look out for them, that those around them are going to help. Additionally, the team actually has to look out for them, right? So as much as the leadership of the team has to like have credibility in doing the things they're going to say they're going to do, the individual team members also have to do the things that they're saying they're going to do, and that helps everybody buy into the system, right? And the last thing is everybody has to know their own role in what's going on, but they also kind of have to know what's going on, around them, right? So it doesn't necessarily do us very good for us to just do our one thing. We have to kind of know how we integrate with those of us around us, in other words, in order to help others within our team do their job so we can do our job better, and then the team is successful. And then if the team is successful and it's aligned with the goals of the organization, then off we go being successful, right? And so everybody sort of has to buy in and know what they're up to and know what those people around them are up to. The leaders have to be credible. And now we get the organization sort of pulling in the same direction to achieve those goals and visions that we talked about at the beginning. There's plenty of books, by the way, on writing goals and visions and et cetera, et cetera. Not going to go into that here, but just know that those exist if you desire to write a vision statement or a mission statement for your organization. The last thing I think is there has to be what I'll call realistic enthusiasm, right? I know that most people have been a part of an organization where the person in charge is like unrealistically enthusiastic, right? Everything's the best. There's no things that are bad. We are the greatest or whatever, right? And the people who are doing the actual work are slogging in miserable conditions, right? So I think you have to be realistically hopeful, as it were, right? You have to acknowledge when things are not great. You have to celebrate wins when they are. And when things are not great, again, you have to make, as a leader, you have to make, confident and credible efforts to change that situation if you can. Additionally, if you are a team member in an organization, you can do credible things to help improve the situation. And you should also acknowledge both the goods and the bads of the things that are going on, right? I mean, I know from personal experience, when you're down at the bottom of an organization, it's really easy to get negative and sort of complain about, well, I don't understand what's going on and why, and there's a lot of reasons why that happens. But right, oftentimes that becomes the MO of the average person within an organization, and they fail to see like the actual good things that are going on, right? Often people work in really good places and they have a negative attitude, and it sours the whole thing, right? So what I would say is if people know what they're doing and leaders are making credible efforts, then we need to acknowledge both the goods and the bads in a constructive way in order to help improve it, right? And so if we can be realistically hopeful that we can improve the things that need improving and celebrate the things that need celebrating, then we can drive the whole organization towards improvement, in my opinion. So I think those are just some of a potential ton of ingredients that would make an organization successful. And what I think that makes organizations winning, and even if they aren't always successful, but at least they have this winning mentality, is that they like fully embrace these ideas, right? They fully embrace it. And everybody from the top to the bottom of the organization is tied into these ideas, right? We know what the goals are. We know how to be credible. We know how to be positive when we need to be, and we know how to fix the things that need fixing. We know where we fall in the team, et cetera, right? But I think the last element that gives an organization, win or lose, the sort of winning mentality, is that like they're, beyond all of these things, is if they're looking to improve the organization, they are not afraid to sort of communicate that up and down the entire chain, right? And so there's this level of openness of communication between the highest level and the lowest level of organization that allows the free flow of realistic information, right? And I think where organizations often come off the track is when they have this sort of negative feedback loop of they can't, the people at the bottom can't make their case, as it were, up. People at the top can't communicate successfully down, and there's this sort of dearth of information that leads to sort of a lot of infighting, in my opinion. That also leads to a lot of gossiping and those kind of things, and those sort of things will tear an organization down, right? So breaking down communication barriers at all levels, I think, is super important when it comes to being successful, right? And when you get all of these things going and the people at the top really communicating, how are we going to make this place better, and the people at the bottom doing the same thing, and all of the other ingredients working, I think that's how you really get a winning organization. All right, so we'll be jumping into more future topics, updating the things that we've seen over the last few weeks as we go along. As always, you can like and follow me on YouTube and Instagram at the Fighter Pilot Professor, and get your podcasts wherever you like to get your podcasts. Have a good one.